Hawk is going to get, respect from the Baron. Okay, click record.
All right, I'm going to click record, and we'll begin this again.
Name of the book title and everything.
I'm reading from the book, by the book, and this is the epilogue. When Hawk next approached the gate of Siegburg Castle, spring had begun to breathe life into the air, and the breeze carried hints of damp earth and new greenery. Hawk strode onward with delight, knowing that for once he looked every inch the part of a dashing hero. His boots gleamed black, his black vest was embroidered with scarlet, and a rich red cloak was thrown over his shoulders, held in place by a silver clasp. Even the rubies in his sword hilt glittered in the noonday sun. As if this weren't enough contrast to his previous visits, Hawk was greeted by a deep, formal bow from Carl, who stood alertly watching atop the castle wall. Then Carl disappeared, and there was a great clanking and creaking as the rusted portcullis began to rise from the muddy ground. For the first time ever, Hawk entered the castle through its official gate. He crossed the courtyard toward the castle keep, surprised to see two pale men dressed in somewhat faded livery flanking the main doors. At his approach, they lifted golden horns to their lips and sounded a piercing fanfare that almost made Hawk jump out of his skin. The great double doors to the castle groaned open, revealing two more servants who blinked and squinted at the sunlight which streamed into the entrance hall. "Wait here for the moment, guest of the Baron," said one of them pompously, "and we will announce your arrival." The pair shut and barred the front doors, leaving the hall dim with sputtering candles and the weak sunlight that filtered in through its high, thin windows. Then the servants both disappeared through another set of double doors at the end of the hall. Hawk stood for a moment, his heart racing. He went over his memorized speech again and again in his head as his eyes adjusted to the gloom of the castle keep. The walls of the entrance hall were hung with the paintings of what Hawk could only assume were the various barons of Siegburg throughout history. After several minutes of waiting impatiently for the servants to return, Hawk wandered over to the portraits. He could see that each bore a small plaque identifying the subject of the portrait. Between the dark colors used in the paintings and the thin layer of dust that coated them all, Hawk could barely tell one baron from another. One by one, he read the plaques, barely glancing at the murky paintings, until he arrived at the last one, which read, "Baron Stefan von Siegburg and family." This one hung upon the side wall, isolated from the others. Eagerly Hawk looked up, pleased to find that this painting was cleaner and easier to study. In the back stood a tall, handsome man with dark hair and eyes and a tremendous mustache. His powerful frame and dark coloring strongly suggested Barnard, but his facial features were more rugged and angular, his expression slightly warmer. The bear... Yeah, I swallowed my saliva. The Baron's hand rested protectively on the shoulder of his wife, who was seated beside him. In the face of the Baroness, Hawk instantly recognized Barnard's full mouth and his haughty features. But the Baroness's hair was like spun honey, and her eyes were a cool powder blue. Something about the graceful fall of her hair tugged at Hawk's memory, though he knew he had never seen her before. The Baroness held the hand of a scowling young boy of 10 or so, who was decked out in frills and ribbons. Hawk grinned, amused to see that the maturity had done little to change Barnard's temperament. Then he moved his gaze to the small girl who stood at the baronet's side. Something about her caught at Hawk's heart instantly. Didn't she die or disappear or something? But it was more than that. There was something about the way she stood apart from the other three. The Baron's attention was directed toward his wife, the Baroness's towards her son. The young girl with the silver gold braids simply stood alone in the midst of her family. Her posture was straight, the tilt of her chin very proud, but there was something in her eyes that suggested a silent longing. That longing drew Hawk closer to the painting, so close that his nose nearly touched the canvas. And at last, despite the dim light, he made out the color of her eyes. Gray. Gray like mist, like stone, like the wings of a mourning dove. Hawk stopped breathing. All at once, 3 revelations hit him with the power of an avalanche. First, the Baron's daughter was the woman from his dream. Those eyes, that pale hair, even her lost look was the same one that had troubled his sleep. Second, she was still alive somewhere. Why else would he have dreamed of her in Harana's peace? Why else would she have asked for his help? And lastly, whatever it took, he would be the one to find her. He would rescue her and bring her home, and that would be the one to make that haunting loneliness disappear from her dove-gray eyes. "Master Hawk?" came a voice from the front of the hall. Hawk looked up to see one of the Baron's servants standing with an air of great importance in the doorway. "The Baron will see you now." Hawk turned, straightened his vest, and followed the servant toward the great hall. Halfway to the door, he turned to look one last time at the little girl in the portrait. Then, with a smile, he drew forth his sword and saluted her. And that is the end of By the Book. Mind you, we wrote By the Book to be a full telling of the entire first game, but Hero's Quest, but it became so large we had to split it up in 2. And as it is, this is a large book. But that is the first book of the series, but may or may not ever get completed.